Bonjour mes amis, hi guys. Fairly eventful weekend in Hong Kong and in the watch world. Let's condense this. First, I was happy to watch Bruce Williams's video about the Rolex Air King, which he considers his favorite Rolex. Separately, I noticed the watch on Williams Formula One team's deputy principal Claire Williams's wrist during the F1 qualifying session in Monza. I myself had been wearing mine for the past 4 days when I saw this, and funnily the Watchbox posted on Facebook a picture of the Air King under a caption, "Which is your favorite Rolex?" Are the stars aligning for this long, unloved entry-level steel sports stunner? I remember not thinking much of it a couple of years ago in the jeweler's windows, and suddenly this watch is taking over much of my wrist time. Like many Rolex, it's one that you really get once you wear it. I love how the white gold 3, 6 and 9 reflect the light and marry with the polished bezel to dazzle at times, while a flick of the wrist makes them vanish. And it's the minute intervals that call for attention, along with the discreet pop of green and yellow. The Milgauss type case is voluptuous and conforms well to larger wrists, but is still at home on a lady's watch, as Miss Williams proves with panache. Friend of the channel and pilot Danny mentioned how the watch helps his pre-flight routine, and when you think about it, much of our daily schedule revolves around 5-minute incremental benchmarks, not the least for yours truly, who has a real job, and it involves following Asia stock markets, which annoyingly enough all open and close at different times with 5 or 10-minute auctions. The Big Nine signals the opening of hostilities in Singapore and Kuala Lumpur. The Big Six, the end of the battle in India. 15:15, Philippines closing auction for 5 minutes with an additional 10 minutes of trading behind. 16:45, a quirky time to read on this watch actually, is the Malaysia auction starting for 5 minutes with, 10 minutes runoff afterwards. 16:50 Indonesia until 5 p.m. when Singapore gets its 5 minutes auction, etc. You get the point. This watch is sturdy, accurate, practical. It's a quick reference on the wrist with a lot of flair. In other watch news, it was hilarious to see
a monster. This is a monster.
Archie Luxury tear a new one to Oris across several videos about the release of their big crown ProPilot X. One of those concept watches that should just remain that, a concept, because I don't foresee many people caring to drop $7,500 on a 44mm titanium watch with a raw, skeletonized movement whose only technical achievement is to boast a 10-day, 12 in fact, power reserve, which is probably not long enough to cover the time elapsed until you'd care to wear it again since you last put it down once the novelty has worn off.
I'm thinking to myself, they've done all the cheap things.
Yes, it looks like a modern jet fighter, but so what? Nobody has to see this. But if that's your cup of tea, grab one. Just don't ever try to sell it, or it will hurt, as even a $1,500 Oris loses half its value on the second-hand market. I got 3 words for Oris: Zenith DeFi Classic. Better in every single way you can imagine. Actually, the Seiko Shogun is a lot more fun for a lot less than the ProPilot as well, in the titanium range with that sort of angular case. The release was done in Shanghai, close to the factory, as Archie joked, to make matters worse, with Oris flying in journalists and YouTubers. Watch their videos, read the Hodinky article, and let me know in the comments what you decide for yourself. Having said all this, you could do a lot worse. Now, in case you are still not subscribed to Tim Mosso's Watchbox Reviews channel, check out his Sunday live show and a very interesting law of diminishing returns theory on watch collecting. I must admit, the thrill of the first affordable watches you buy is hard to match, even when going way up market, which is something that many collectors inevitably do. Great food for thoughts, and I could never have phrased it better than Tim, the ultimate watch guru of our times. And finally, news from Hong Kong. Despite the city's CEO holding out an olive branch at the end of last week, the rioters were back out this weekend, starting a bonfire at the very same central station exit that I took daily for months and where I shot a video about a month ago. So they were trashing the station and, as usual now, wreaking havoc around town. This morning, college kids were lining up in the streets right outside my home window, shouting whatever, scaring little school kids that are right there at their bus stop. Others rallied in front of the US Embassy to voice some questionable pleas, and all in all, there's no end to this because there's no leader to talk to and nobody addresses the real issues up front, except actually Carrie Lam, the CEO of Hong Kong, who did mention the property prices problems, even though her government hasn't done anything substantial about it, and her predecessors basically sold out the city to mega developers. And when you see that blaze in Central and that rally at the US Embassy, you can't help but wonder how much is staged and who gets paid to push this protest beyond what the other 7 million citizens trying to make a living here deem acceptable. Who gains from destabilizing Hong Kong? That's more than I care to speculate on a watch channel, but everyone who's lived in a democracy knows you still have to wake up in the morning, go to work and pay your taxes. And many people abroad would love to live in Hong Kong. Well, would have loved to. Have a good week, guys.
But what's the connection between the net and Hong Kong protests? On May 14th, Hong Kong opposition figure Martin Lee had a meeting with net representatives Lee Cheuk-yen, Mak Yin-ting, and Nathan Law in Hong Kong. 2 days later, Lee met US Secretary of State Michael Pompeo in Washington, who expressed his concern about the Hong Kong government's proposed fugitive bill. The fugitive bill caused concern among some Hong Kong residents. Despite authorities' assurances, they still worried that Hong Kong is losing its autonomy to Beijing. Opposition factions took advantage of this worry to instigate instability. On June 12, a demonstration against the fugitive bill took place near the Legislative Council building in Hong Kong. There was a fierce clash between protesters and police. On July 7th, Hong Kong SAR Chief Executive Carrie Lam said the work on the bill was a total failure.
The bill is dead.
But protests didn't stop, getting more violent instead. Wenwei Po newspaper. Julie Ide, who works at the US Consulate General in Hong Kong, was caught on camera meeting with opposition figures Martin Lee and Anson Chan. Later that day, Ide also met Joshua Wong, one of the leaders of the Occupy Central movement in 2014. But long before those reports, growing evidence pointed at the US as the hand-sowing discord in Hong Kong after US politicians met with Lee and other Hong Kong opposition leaders, including Jimmy Lai. Lai, the founder of Apple Daily, was also spotted on August 3rd meeting with a foreign man in a restaurant, saying, "Welcome to Hong Kong and well done with the situation." That man in the photo is Mark Simon, the right hand of Jimmy Lai, who has been called a man of mystery with ties to CIA. Even though he denies those accusations, a report by the South China Morning Post said Simon's father worked with the CIA for 35 years, and that Simon himself interned with the US intelligence. While the agenda of the meetings might not have been publicized, the 2014 Occupy Central movement could provide insight into understanding what's happening in Hong Kong now. Before the Occupy Central movement, Martin Lee, Anson Chan, and Jimmy Lai went to Washington to meet with the Ned and US politicians and plan their so-called independence movement. The Ned denied meeting with Martin Lee, but Michael Pillsbury, a former advisor to the US Department of Defense, said on Fox News that the Ned was pretty much involved.
We also have funded millions of dollars of programs through the National Endowment for Democracy. So in that sense, the Chinese accusation is not totally false.
So how exactly is Ned involved? In 2003, the Ned led a massive march in Hong Kong. That's according to the organization, believe it or not. In a newsletter, the organization listed its work in Hong Kong as part of protests cited under the subheadline, Examples of Past and Present Programs. According to the Ned official website, the organization started donating money to Hong Kong since 1995. 3 main groups in Hong Kong have received money from the Ned. They are the American Center for International Labor Solidarity, the Hong Kong Human Rights Monitor, and the National Democratic Institute for International Affairs. A paper of congressional hearings on the oversight of the Ned held in 1986